welcome to another Embodiment podcast with me, Karin van Maanen, by myself this time. And you may have tuned into recent conversations about embodied meditation, which I had with Mark Walsh and Daniela Welzel. And this is, of course, because we have our meditation teacher training coming up starting in March 2023. So if you're interested, check out the website embodimentunlimited.com and look at courses, and you can find out more about it. And of course, embodied meditation is always a cornerstone of our work, which has probably come across in earlier podcasts on the topic. And today I thought I might go a bit more deeply into some of the principles of embodied meditation and a bit more about why it's so useful to bring the body into meditation, as well as my own journey with that. And also how it's really helped me as a mindfulness teacher and yoga teacher, and more recently as an embodiment trainer. And of course, in my general daily life, which is actually an area of embodied meditation that we're really focused on in our trainings. Because what's the use of sitting for hours on a meditation cushion, and then the moment you get off the cushion and go back to the cold face of life, if you like, where we say in English the cold face, where the real work is happening, whether it's down and dirty. As soon as you get there, you forget all the calm, the serenity, the wisdom you thought you had. And, I speak about myself here, hopefully. I include myself in that. It all goes to shit as soon as the shit hits the fan. So bringing embodiment into daily life is a big part of our work with meditation in Embodiment Unlimited. And some schools of meditation are pretty good at that. One of the things that really attracted me to practicing with the Plum Village community, international community originally started by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen master who passed away last year in 2022, you may have heard of, is that they have this idea called socially engaged Buddhism. But in fact, some of their community practices and relational practices are suitable for anybody. And it's probably out of the meditation schools and communities I've been part of, it's probably one of the more kind of applicable forms of Buddhism that seems to attract a lot of non-Buddhists. And that's also something that's really dear to my heart, and I know is part of the point of the Embodiment podcast and Embodiment Unlimited is to bring these practices to anybody who's interested, anybody who has a body, anybody, literally. And so one of the things I learned from going to Plum Village groups and retreats was, which is there in the Buddhist teachings as well, but was how to really bring some of the ethics of the practice into my life and into my relationships. And that's also at the core of embodied meditation. One of the big things you may have heard about in relation to meditation and mindfulness is compassion and kindness. And I've learned a lot more about how to do that from more modern traditions of Buddhism and mindfulness and Plum Village than I have from some of the very traditional Zen and Theravadan techniques. And at Plum Village, they have something which is often referred to as Dharma sharing, Dharma being the teachings of the Buddha. But in fact, it's basically a form of mindfully and kindly communicating in an authentic way. So there's elements there of authentic relating, or there's elements of Dharma sharing in authentic relating, circling, and practices like that. Compassionate inquiry sometimes is in Dharma sharing. And Dharma sometimes also means, and because Sanskrit is a complex language, the reality, everything around us that makes up our reality. So sometimes I think of it as real sharing. And I find that embodied meditation as a foundation for this type of work: embodied communicating, circling, authentic relating, compassionate inquiry, somatic inquiry, relational mindfulness, is pretty crucial, because quite often I have to drop into my body, drop my attention down into the body. I'm pointing down at myself. For those of you that are listening on Spotify or somewhere where you don't have the image. Because if I'm very in my head and I'm already thinking about the next thing I'm going to say, I won't be very present. So I'm practicing that right now, because I'm doing this without a script, and our podcast interviews are unscripted. We do kind of learn a bit about the interviewee if we don't know about them already, but they're very spontaneous and in the moment, and they're barely edited. And this one I'm recording in the same way. And so to do that, I've actually sat down on my meditation cushion, and wherever you are, obviously if you're driving or navigating through busy traffic as a pedestrian or a cyclist, whatever you're doing, there'll be more mindful of that. But we could start, as we often do in these podcasts, with a practical thing. And I'll bring in a 2 or 3 today, I think, which is to really notice how you are in this moment. So you can be fully present with, in your case, listening, and I'm fully present with talking. So wherever you are, feel your feet on the ground or your bum on your seat. Feel the structure of the furniture or the earth beneath you. Could be the moving train. If you're on a plane, the structure of the plane and the lineage of technology and science that's keeping you up there. So it can be more than the earth. It's also everything that supports us in our life. So we can create a sense of support more broadly, beneath us and behind us historically. Everything that's brought us to this present moment now, sensing that as a support around us, within us, beneath us. And taking a slightly deeper breath, and as you exhale, relax your body a little bit, relaxing into that idea and the reality of the support. Relaxing the belly. And if you're standing or sitting still, you could turn your palms forwards or upwards if they're resting on your lap. So there's a receptiveness in your embodiment. An invitation to listen to my words. And then bringing your attention into your own body. If it's safe to do so, you could close your eyes for a moment. Take another deep breath, feeling the breath Feeling the lungs and the lungs expanding in your body. Getting a felt sense of your inner space. Breathing out, relaxing. The next in-breath, imagining you're breathing into your entire body. Into the tips of your toes, into the tips of your fingers, the tips of your ears. And as you breathe out, imagine breathing out through all the pores in your skin into the space around you. You could repeat that once or twice if you'd like to. And then reflecting for a moment why you're tuning in today. Maybe there's a particular intention for you, learning. You're curious about embodied meditation. Again, the palms up or facing forward also embodies an openness to learning about new things. And then noticing how your body is. If you're a little sleepy, you might like to stretch your arms up, lift your chest, look up towards the sky or at the sky if you're outside. A deep energizing breath in, and then a little shake and a jiggle. And then sitting or moving, standing, however you like, as we continue. And so I hope you do pick up some interesting things from this podcast. I started off by talking about this relational aspect of embodiment and mindfulness. And on our training, we have sections on this, certainly sections on developing how to develop kindness, often done in Buddhism with imagery or the formulation of well wishes for other people. And those can be super useful, and they're even more effective. In fact, I'm happy to say much more effective when we bring the body into it. So, for example, this idea of support and community, we're quite big on in our work. The meditation path can be quite lonesome. I mentioned the other day on our embodied meditation event that when I first started meditating, I think I was about 15, and some of my secondary school friends, high school friends, if you're American, were getting into the alternative culture of the 50s, 60s. We were listening to music of the 60s and reading people like Jack Kerouac and the Beat Poets. And I picked something up from Jack Kerouac, On the Road and Dharma Bums, about meditation. So I was curious. And occasionally, if I went to a big city, usually my parents would take me, but when I was 15, I was lucky enough, my parents let me go to Paris with a group of friends. And I sometimes saw the Hare Krishna community, and so occasionally was approached by them. And I was getting interested in the spiritual. So I remember sitting down one day, I'd got a book out of the library, and it might have been a Hare Krishna book or a Hindu book about meditation, and there were mantras in it. And I was trying to, a mantra is, if you don't know that word, it's a repetitive phrase or word, traditionally in Sanskrit or Pali sometimes, that you repeat over and over again. These are these ancient languages that Hindu practices and Buddhist practices were written down in hundreds of years ago. So I was trying to do this completely alien mantra and had nobody to support me apart from this really quite weird book. And, of course, it didn't really do much for me. I had lots of thoughts. I was confused. I thought I wasn't supposed to have any thoughts. So I quickly gave up. I didn't have a teacher. I didn't have a community. Then I started to get into yoga years later, almost 15 years later. And we did a little tiny bit of meditation in the yoga class. And while I had a really great yoga teacher, I have to say, who inspired me enough to carry on to becoming a teacher and now teaching it for about 15 years or so by now. But we didn't do much meditation, and she didn't really say much about how to do it. And so again, I did want to meditate, and I tried again, largely by myself. And I didn't get on with it very well until I started a yoga foundation course where we had specific sessions on meditation. And we were encouraged to talk to each other and to the teachers about our meditation practice. We were encouraged to do meditation every day for a certain amount of weeks out of the course and keep a journal. And that's when I really started to kind of get what it was all about, and that it wasn't about not having thoughts, that it was about being present and becoming familiar with all the habitual patterns in my mind. And it was less embodied at the time, but to some extent also in my body. And I realized I'd had an earlier stint about 10 years before of having cognitive behavioral therapy. And I could see how the two would marry up. And I could also see how I already learned a few skills from CBT that were useful for meditation. And that meditation could be very useful for therapy like that especially. So I realized there were probably some transferable skills in both directions. So on I went to eventually work with a Buddhist yoga teacher who I've actually interviewed on the podcast, Emma Slade, who's now a Buddhist nun. We became friends and we traveled all over the place together, learning more about Buddhism and Buddhist culture. And she introduced me to another Buddhist teacher called Maanen from a Dutch teacher, who introduced me to Tibetan Buddhist meditation. So I started to learn more and more and more and more and more different practices, and some of them were a bit more embodied, some of them weren't really. And I was starting to learn things like metta, kindness meditation, visualizing things, which was working to some extent. But a lot of the time I was sort of thinking, well, it's all a bit mechanical. I'm just sitting here going, oh, may I be happy, may you be happy, may they be well. Sometimes, pretending to send kind thoughts to people I wasn't getting on with and not really meaning it, and then judging myself, and then being told on a training or reading in a book, oh, you shouldn't judge yourself, and then judging myself a little bit more because I shouldn't be judging myself. And it was all getting very heady and conceptual, and I was spending quite a lot of time thinking about it, reading about it, writing about it in my journal. And then I got into embodiment practices. And I learned very soon on one of the first trainings I did with Mark, Embodied Yoga Principles Teacher Training, I learned a centering practice. And this, I believe, is from Paul Linden, who's also on several of our podcasts. The smiling heart centering. Let's do it now, actually. It's a great one. So again, wherever you are, as long as you don't need your full attention for driving or operating heavy machinery. Maybe you can pull over or pause the machine if you have time. Stopping, pausing, and centering is normally taught with the eyes open. But if it helps you for a moment to close your eyes, especially if you've never done centering before, again, bring your attention to your body. You might place a hand on your heart, on the center of your chest, the area of the heart. Taking a couple of breaths, perhaps you can feel your pulse. And being aware of the area of your heart, maybe the heart rhythm. And if you're not very in touch with your heart, don't worry. Actually noticing a certain amount of disembodiment, disassociation is really worthwhile too. Like knowing we're not in touch with certain parts of ourselves, especially important areas like the heart, is information that could motivate you to continue with some of these practices I'm talking about. You can keep your hand there if you like, or you can lower it and keep your attention with the heart or with the intention to increase your awareness of your heart, connection with your heart, presence in your own heart, you can say. And again, on the next couple of out breaths, relax a little bit, relax your belly. And then imagine someone in front of you, unless you're lucky enough to be already with someone that usually makes you smile, that you feel friendly towards right now. Bring somebody to mind or look at them in reality here and now. It could also be your pet. Maybe you're walking your dog and they're playing in the park right now. You can look at your dog. You can look at your cat. You can imagine someone's smiling face. And imagine them smiling at you. And you might already involuntarily, automatically notice you're starting to smile yourself. And it may just be a hint of a smile, like a very slight upturn on the corners of your mouth, the corners of your eyes. I'm doing this with you. Maybe you can hear my voice changing. And if that's not the case, that's okay. You can imagine this friendly friend is kind of beaming some warmth, some friendliness towards you. And imagine receiving it like warm, pleasant sunlight on your face. And then as you breathe in, imagine you can breathe in that warmth, that friendliness into your lungs and to your heart, nestled between your lungs. Imagine you can let that smile breathe down into your heart area. Maybe you actually feel a sense of warmth, friendliness in you could say, the emotional heart. Gladness. My colleague Martin Aylward on our Embodied Meditation course calls it the effervescence of the heart. Effervescence, like bubbliness. Lemonade and champagne are effervescent. Joy, gladness, these types of emotions can be felt in this area of the body. And then notice how you feel. And you can learn this smiling heart centering. We're doing it a few more times, very simple, become aware of maybe the need to center, to regulate your state in the moment because you're a little distracted, or with the smiling heart, it works well if you're a bit upset or a bit nervous, you need some support. You can learn to do it quite quickly, pausing, remembering you've got support, imagining someone supportive smiling at you, with you, or putting a hand on your back. You can get creative. And then when you start to feel that it works, notice how it feels in the body and what you do with your body then. Maybe there's a smile, maybe there's a relaxation, a softening. And you can imagine and kind of fake it till you make it, work with the intention of it until your connection with your body improves, and maybe you start to feel some of these sometimes quite subtle emotions in the body. There's things like contentment, gratefulness. They're not easily felt in the body for many of us because we're more in touch with the dramatic emotions, dramatic embodied experiences like orgasms, or being totally in love, or being really pissed off or very sad. We can recognize those emotions usually, but not so much this gentle effervescence of the heart when you see a friend unexpectedly in the street. And that's another time when you can practice it, when you're with these people that mean a lot to you in your life, or maybe just a friendly neighbor. It really helps me if I spend a few days on my own at home, which I have done actually just now, because my partner's away. And I've seen people on Zoom, and that's lifted my spirits. And I've seen a couple of neighbors I've just waved at. And in those moments, you can be aware of how it makes you feel to see a friendly face, to have some human connection. And so you can bring that as a first step in your mindful relating, your authentic relating, your circling practice if you have one, or simply into the next video call with your mum or whoever. So you're really present with them and recalling their presence, their supportive presence in times of need when you're perhaps alone and you need to resource yourself. So, back to the idea that embodied meditation skills can support you in all of these practices and with all the important relationships you might have in your life in important situations, but also give a lot more depth to other practices like dance, like martial arts. But how could a practice that's about sitting still and really not doing very much achieve that? So I'd like to talk a bit more about the postural aspects, because of course if you're a martial artist, you feel very different if you go into a certain fighting stance. It feels very powerful, and if you go into like a dance movement, so imagine yourself in Swan Lake embodying tragic love, that feels very different. But in a very subtle way, these types of things are going on in the body in response to our thinking patterns, to emotions that come up in response to external situations. But when we're in daily life, let alone in a dance class or a martial arts class, it's very hard to notice how these things subtly play out into the internal life of the body, because they're so dramatic. So we're very much, I think most of us, very much in touch with the more dramatic emotions like fear, anger. Like most people know when they're angry. Even when they say, I'm not grumpy, they probably know they are. When you're sad, when you're crying. But subtler emotions, especially the positive ones, in my experience, are harder to sense in the body. So it might be hard to feel the smiling heart for real, and to notice subtle sensations like joy, gladness, kind of joy, but slightly different, gratefulness, contentment. We can sense these in the body, but usually we really need to tone down the external stimuli, and that's hard to do in a lot of other embodiment practices. And so we can learn to really check in with ourselves and these sensations when we're in communication, but also when we're alone, whilst we're meditating, becoming much more aware of the whole range, the whole spectrum of emotion that we can experience throughout our lives. That can help us with self-awareness, and then in turn, awareness of others. We can tune more deeply into other people from a place of presence and acceptance of our own emotions. I think anger is a commonly tricky one for many people, especially those of us that, because of our spiritual kind of development, whatever you sign up to, like a lot of spiritual traditions, but especially Buddhism that I'm most familiar with, seem to condemn anger in some way, like anger's not a good thing. But I think what they actually mean is that aggression and violence isn't a good thing, because we all experience anger. But I certainly did a lot of pushing anger down already for cultural and social reasons, and then some more during meditation. And actually recognizing the energy of anger, sometimes it's very subtle, just as an aversion, as a, I don't like this, I'm uncomfortable with it. Once I can accept that on such a low, subtle level and know that it's actually okay, then I can start to be more okay with stronger sensations of anger within myself and learn to express them in a non-aggressive way, whilst not suppressing them either. And then I stand a chance to be okay with other people's anger. Well, if it turns to aggression, of course, you'll have boundaries around these things. But I think a lot of the time we can learn from meditation that all of these emotions start in the body. We do something with our body and respond. We feed it with narratives, with stories, judgments. And we can see how a lot of the time we create, in this often subtle, not always subtle way, a whole load of reactions, like a chain of reactions to external and internal stimuli. External stimuli, other people, circumstances, natural disasters, things that seem really unfair, whatever, and internally, strong self-criticism, self-judgment, being harsh towards ourselves, and also going more deeply into stories, like someone was maybe a little bit impatient with you, you're angry about it, and you're going over and over the story, and you're just feeding that. And those are the things that we can interrupt. We can learn to interrupt through meditation, not suppressing the emotion, but seeing how we make it worse by ruminating and catastrophizing, going over and over, and making it worse than it is. So those are super useful things for relationship with self and others. And again, authentically, kindly expressing these things without doing harm. So wherever you're coming from, that's really useful, and it gives more depth and more detailed awareness. And then when we start taking it into our life off the meditation cushion, or however you like to meditate. We go through lots of different postural options in our trainings. On and off the cushion, you can train yourself to work with that. And also bringing some choices in there. So something like the smiling heart, bringing ideas like that into a compassion meditation can certainly make it more real. But can also set you up for applying those things in conversation, in prayer, if you're into praying. It can help you with difficult relationships, and recognizing that difficult, annoying colleague you've got is a human being and gets grumpy and irritable just like you do sometimes, and I do, definitely do. It also opens the door to something that Rick Hansen calls taking in the good, which is basically countering the negativity bias. So we tend to be most of us, very focused on the things that go wrong. That's why we're also better at recognizing the dramatic emotions like fear and anger, because our nervous system is wired to be more on the lookout for those, because there might be something dangerous that we need to get away from. However, they can come up inappropriately as a result of being so well trained in looking out for dangers. So we're less good at the good emotions, not just because they tend to be more subtle, but also because we're not so well trained. So again, a way of bringing this kind of stuff into life is noticing the goodness of human contact. I've just spent a few days on my own at home. My partner's away, and I have met people on Zoom, and I've kind of really appreciated that and used it as a smiling heart meditation to see friendly faces on the screen. Right now, I'm imagining people listening to the podcast all over the world. Some of them I'll know, some of them I won't know. So it's making me smile already just thinking about it. Maybe you can hear the difference in my voice. And that moment of kind of emotional nourishment when I have a brief chat with a neighbour or wave at someone I know in the street, and really letting that sink in rather than just being so distracted I don't even notice the neighbour. I don't take time to stop and have a brief chat or take in the faces of people in the Zoom room. So being really present with people and taking in the goodness of their company can be great. Back to the idea of different postures. So we often work with different postures, and some schools of meditation do that as well. And hopefully, most places where you'd learn to meditate now, you wouldn't be forced to sit in some difficult full lotus cross-legged position on the floor, because most of us, including me, can't do that comfortably or without breaking ourselves. So it's useful to know how you can sit. You can sit on a chair, which then also makes your practice maybe more transferable to your office chair or to meditating on the train, wherever you find yourself. You can do standing meditation, which is associated with a kind of personal empowerment. So we can feel more like we're standing in our own power when we're doing standing meditation. It's more commonly taught in martial arts traditions. Really worth trying, especially if you're struggling with trauma to do with abuse and violence done to you. Walking meditation is great if you're very restless. Again, there can be many reasons for that we go into on our course, from trauma to general stress to things like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. People who struggle with those things often also struggle with meditation. However, if taught in a way that's accessible and helpful to them, it can also help with all of those conditions. You do have to be especially careful around trauma. So, and we go into that more on our course. You can also listen to David Treleaven's podcast here on the Embodiment podcast with Mark. He's also a guest tutor on our courses. He teaches trauma-sensitive mindfulness. So there are ways and different postures help. Lying down can be really helpful. If you're tired, it might end up being a nap, but hey, maybe that's just what you need. If you're unwell, it's very uncomfortable to be upright. Lying down is an option. And I mentioned how certainly sitting, standing, and walking are very transferable to life. So that's helpful. And we can also tweak those postures. So we can get into very habitual meditation postures. Again, if you've been taught it's best to sit, with your legs crossed on the floor and your hands in a particular gesture, it might work really well for you, but it's just enhancing one particular embodiment, and that might be very subtle. But what if you straightened up just a tiny bit, or allowed yourself to slump, relax downwards a tiny bit? Like we did earlier, like stretching up might wake you up a little bit, kind of regulating up. You can do that now if you're not driving or operating some potentially dangerous machinery if you can't stop. Just lifting the chest a bit, looking up, has a more wakeful quality. However, if you're a bit hypervigilant for whatever reason, it might be much more useful to relax a bit, not necessarily slumping all the way down, because you start to feel a little bit down or sleepy. But playing around with these two extremes of being super alert and upright, awake, eyes open, and more relaxed, eyes down, closed. And on a subtle level, palms up or down makes a difference. And these are little things that you can again bring into life off the mat. So if you want to seem more relaxed with other people, let your posture soften and be a little bit more slumpy, for want of a better word. If you want to be more present, more wakeful, come across as very clear, maybe with a bit more authority, look up, straighten up. And in meditation, you can notice the subtle difference. So that's two ways in which we work with posture. The third way is a bit of a slightly broader topic, actually. It's about the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. And we often work with this model to describe four ways of being. It's a map, so not everybody fits exactly in that model, one of the elements. But you might, if you think about someone who you think of as a bit of an airhead, it's probably somebody who maybe doesn't always have their shit together. Maybe they're very creative and playful and fun to be around, but not very organized. Perhaps they're great at generating ideas, but not necessarily following through and finishing off. You might also recognize the word fiery, like they're a fiery person. Mark, who's the main interviewer on the podcast, is quite a fiery guy. He speaks much faster than me. I'm more earthy, I'm more slow and methodical. And by developing my air and fire capacities, I'm now able to do this podcast without loads of planning, being more spontaneous, responding to what arises in the moment. Water is often about being relational. Relationships, communication, etc. And of course, these four elements are always present in the body. earth in the bones, water in the blood, and all the juiciness in the body, fire in the body's temperature, and air in the breath, and some other places sometimes too. And all of these elements exist in space, which sometimes added as a fifth element. So there's many different models. To keep it simple, we would focus on earth, water, fire, and air. So if you sat very upright, like I just described, eyes open, that gives perhaps a bit more of a fiery quality to the meditation. And if you made the focus of your meditation something like purpose or meaning, maybe by meditating on the reality of impermanence and that your life is not infinite, that it will end one day, it can kind of put you in that cauldron, sitting in the fire of that reality, can put you in touch with meaning and purpose. So that would be 2 ways of doing a fiery meditation. An earthy meditation is the way most meditations already are. It's often about generating calm and stability. You can focus on your feet on the ground, the support of the ground beneath you. You can hear my voice lowering when I talk about that, and generate a sense of stability and calm, solidity, equanimity, those types of qualities. Believe it or not, you can do an airy meditation if you start taking life a little bit too seriously. I sometimes do a bit of silly movements in the middle of meditation. If you're watching YouTube, you can see me doing that now. You can do it too. If you're able to, you can do some funny sound, bah, put a funny face. Let all that seriousness go. Take a deep breath in. Look up at the space all above you and around you, and then use the mantra my Buddhist teacher told me. So what? So what? Stop taking everything so seriously. And that's actually a very Zen and sometimes Tibetan Buddhist approach. To not take ourselves so seriously, to not be completely engrossed in all the things that our ego throws up, which is often about these hindrances we talk about in Buddhism, the difficult emotions, getting all absorbed into those. So air in the form of humor and lightness is super useful. Water, of course, in that relational aspect, self-awareness, kindness to self, and then taking that to others as well. And so we work on those on our training. And then they're very useful to bring into daily life in terms of seeing what you want to develop, emphasizing that in your meditation, and recognizing how you do the 4 elements in subtle ways on the cushion and in your life. So quite a few ideas I brought in there. Pausing, becoming aware of the body, finding support, remembering support, for listening to ourselves and others, being more in touch with what's going on, bringing the body into kindness and compassion practices, and then into the more complex relationships of daily life, which takes a lot of time to practice. So don't expect yourself, after you've done loving kindness meditation for a while, to immediately be able to keep calm and kind when you have a really difficult conversation with your partner, or your toddler is throwing a tantrum, or your teenager is rebelling. That's a whole other level of practice. That's like black belt stuff. So start on the cushion and bring it into a friendly chat over coffee with a friend you're having an easygoing time with, and then calibrate up. So calibration is something we bring into our training as well. Don't start with the most difficult thing. preferably start practicing and trying things out when life is relatively okay for you. It's harder when you've just had a massive life change, or you're really unwell, you're going through something major. And then really noticing how the fact that our bodies have a huge impact on how we are. And then a whole other area of work is tuning into the wisdom of the body. So if, for example, a very simple example, again, you can do this with me if you like. If you don't know what to eat tonight, maybe you're going out for dinner, maybe you've still got to go shopping, you could ask your belly. So again, if you're not engaged in something you need all most of your attention for, you could close your eyes for a moment, bring your attention to your belly, maybe place 1 or 2 hands on your belly. Really feel into your belly, if you can. Feel the belly perhaps moving with the breath. Maybe there's some sensation. Mine is gurgling. I'm realizing I'm a little bit hungry, which I didn't notice before. And then you can ask your belly, what would you like for dinner tonight? And see if an answer comes. My answer is soup, so I'm going to be making some soup. And sometimes I ask my heart. I usually have a list of friends that I want to call. And sometimes I ask my heart, who shall I call today? And you can also ask your head, but often we've already asked our head, we've already got the list, we just don't know what to do first, or we can't choose from all the different options. It's sometimes very useful to tune into the body to ask. So all this and more on the upcoming meditation course starting this year in 2023 on the 14th of March. We can probably let you join a little bit later if you hear this too late. Preferably join from the start, makes it easier for you. And hopefully we'd run it next year. And all this and more. The first part of the course, it will all be about your personal practice of these things, because the essence of teaching embodiment is being embodied yourself. Surprise, surprise. And being able to do things without a script. Plan's okay, but when we script things too much, it becomes very unnatural. Second part of the training, teaching facilitation skills, trauma sensitivity. How do you convey some of these things best to other people? You can do both parts together, or you can just do, part 1. If you don't think you've got enough meditation experience yet, we recommend that you have a practice of meditation, at least meditation generally, for at least a year or 2 before teaching it. If you haven't got that, it might be wise to do part 1 and then really get into a regular practice, which will hopefully be established as a result of doing the course. That's certainly one of our aims, to support you in doing that and give you all the resources you need, and then come back and do a facilitation training next year. So that was it for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in a Zoom room, or who knows, in person at one of our in-person events sometime soon. Take care and keep meditating. And if you haven't done it before, think about giving it a go.
Mark Walsh here. If you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, and some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems to people like. I sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check